with everything going on, it's very helpful to really begin to place these locations and understand the intricacies of the Strait of Hormuz.
Why is it that we can't control this Strait of Hormuz or keep Iran from creating problems for the tankers and the transit of ships going through? The reason is that Iran is fighting an asymmetric war. That means they can use very inexpensive things like drones, surface-to-air missile launchers that they can hide in caves and then bring out, quickly, or along roadways. So they also have a fleet of small ships that they can send out, swarms of ships that are small.
Welcome to this episode of Zion's Wire, the official podcast of Zion's Hope, where we bring you prophetic insights and biblical discussions with a passion for God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. I'm Christopher Diaz, joined with David Rosenthal.
Hey, Chris, great to be here.
David, there has been so much happening. I mean, the news has not let up. Everybody's ears are ringing with all the things happening around the world, and center stage is the Middle East.
Yeah, not just by the day, by the hour.
Yeah.
So much is transpiring, and we are now kind of at the point where there is a ceasefire between the United States and Israel and Iran, and it is everyone was, I think, holding their collective breath to see what was going to happen with the deadline that President Trump had imposed on Iran to either have a workable ceasefire that was something that was at least a groundwork or a framework for something that would be tenable in the eyes of the United States. And of course, there were back and forths, and didn't seem like anything was working, that Iran was putting out proposals that were dead in the water right from the start. Even the White House said some of the proposals went right into the trash can. But at the last minute, it looks like they had come up with something that was workable in the eyes of the White House and President Trump with a 10-point plan. I think the U.S. had proposed a 15-point plan initially, and Iran came back with a 10-point plan. There's been a lot of back and forth in terms of what's in the plan, what are those points, and of course you have things coming out of Iran through their media, which is not trustworthy at all,
right.
About what's in the plan, what's not in the plan, what they've agreed to, what they've not agreed to. So there's been a lot of pontificators, people going back and forth as to whether this is a good thing, whether this is a bad thing for the U.S. and for Israel. So a lot remains to be seen. It's the fog of war. There's so much uncertainty, and we get new pieces of information, it seems like every hour, in terms of what's happening over there. So we're going to try to clarify a few things and maybe shed a little bit of biblical insight into what's happening during this episode.
So this war that began, I believe, February 28th was the initial kickoff, and it's been quite some time now that this has been ongoing, and only just in the past maybe week and a half that have we seen other countries outside of the United States and Israel begin to join in and actually throw their hat in with the United States and Israel to say, hey, Iran, enough's enough. You have to stop what you're doing.
Yeah. It seems like it's been going on for a while, but in the same token, when you compare it to other wars historical battles, it's really been such a small period of time thus far. But yes, for us who are watching with more information, more news coming at us than ever before in human history, it seems like it's gone on for quite a while now. And pressure continues to build globally, on the United States, on Israel, in terms of what's happening. And of course, with some of the things that President Trump has said recently or tweeted, that ratchets things up even more. Yeah. And so there's a lot of people that have been unhappy with some of his tweets. President Trump is not always subtle in the way he communicates. I could wish as a Christian that some of the language he uses would be different, the way he says things. He has his style and the way he intends to negotiate, and that is to ask for or to demand something that seems way over here, that may seem completely unrealistic,
Right.
with very bombastic language sometimes.
Hmm.
But his goal is to get at least this much of a deal.
Right.
And so he always shoots very far. But his art of the deal is to now ratchet it back and get something, move the needle from
Right.
where we currently are. And so he really gave Iran an ultimatum, that said, "Look, we're gonna bomb your infrastructure, your bridges," and he did bomb a bridge, just days prior, to show that he was serious about
Right.
that. So we're going to bomb your infrastructure, your oil infrastructure, your bridges. Of course, President Trump and the United States and our military, we don't want to be doing things that are going to be hurting Iranian civilians,
Right.
people who are just innocent in this, caught in the middle of this, who we don't want to hurt them. But at the same time, the challenge is that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is really in lockstep with Iranian leadership at the highest levels, they are mixed in, they are mingled in through the population. They are armed, whereas the general population in Iran is not. And so it is very, very difficult when you have the IRGC and their besiege force, which is kind of a police force that is very brutal on the Iranian people or anybody who dissents. Very difficult for the Iranian people, unarmed, to really rise up and for true regime change. So that's what we're watching to see. How do all these things play out? And of course, you throw into this the nuclear capabilities, and the enriched uranium that Iran has been working on to develop a nuclear weapon. And now you have so many variables and components. It's very difficult to navigate all of these things. And you throw in Iranian proxies, for instance, in Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, where Israel and Hezbollah continue to go at each other. Israel feels it's necessary to go in and to take out these Hezbollah strongholds in the suburbs of Beirut, Lebanon. And now Iran is saying, well, we want that as part of the deal, the ceasefire deal. And Iran is threatening to pull out of the deal, at least recently.
Yeah.
That may change, but they've threatened to pull out of the deal if President Trump doesn't put pressure on Israel to stop going in and going after Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-funded proxy.
It's so interesting, because we have to really put into perspective who we're dealing with, right? The type of regime that the Iranian regime is. And just moments after Trump had released that announcement saying, hey, we have a form of an agreement, within the next hour, countless missiles went off, ballistic missiles went off towards Israel, towards Saudi Arabia, towards UAE, within minutes of this announcement. And I hear some people say, well, communications are down, so this group maybe didn't hear yet that we made an agreement. But
yeah, so many of the Iranian leadership has been decimated and taken out. So the question is, who is the United States really dealing with? And of course, they're back channeling these negotiations through Pakistan, is what's being said. And Egypt, I know, is part of the negotiations as well. So the question is, who are we dealing with? Who has the power to enact the things that they're negotiating on behalf of Iran with the United States? And as you mentioned, even after the ceasefire was announced, you had missiles coming in, cluster bombs coming in over Tel Aviv from Iran. So it becomes very difficult, and that's why I mentioned the fog of war. There is so much uncertainty as it relates to what's transpiring. And you have people who are analyzing this on all different sides, on all different fronts, who have all different opinions. Some are so supportive. We need to give peace a chance. We need to, take this opportunity for a ceasefire. We need to make sure that we're not hurting innocent people. And then you have people on the other side who say, we really shouldn't have taken this break because it allows Iran to regalvanize, to get more prepared for if potentially there's another strike against them in full force by the U.S. and Israel. It gives them time to set up and to strategize as well. And then there's others who say the Iranian regime is implementing taqiyya, which is an Islamic term unique to Sunni Islam, uses it as well, but it's more prevalent within Shia Islam, which is the brand of Islam that comes out of Iran. and that they subscribe to. And takia is really the idea that we can do or say anything as long as it suits our purposes. Now, Islamic scholars would say no, it has to be used only if an Islamic or a Muslim is under threat, where they're under duress and they can say something to preserve their life, as opposed to just outright lying for their own purposes. But
I've
many,
heard of this.
yeah. So many people believe that Iran is implementing takia, which is basically do or say anything, whether it's lying or not, to facilitate your own goals, your own ends, your own purposes. And so that's a concern. You're sitting here for 2 weeks, waiting for these things to develop, waiting for a formal agreement, and Iran is notorious for not adhering to things that they've agreed to in the past.
Yeah, it's. I'm just thinking about the people, and so many are divided, looking at the situation and still pointing blame at Israel or the IDF. And I have to note that just the other day, IDF made an announcement to Iranian civilians not to get on the trains. This is the mentality of the IDF and of the Israeli leadership: is we don't want to hurt civilians. We are keeping this strictly military. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, you're hearing reports that the IRGC is taking civilians and using them around some of these locations that were
power plants.
We're going to blow up this area. Oh, let's put some civilians there.
Yeah, and you've seen them on the news. They're
horrible.
Lined up, women and children lined up waving Iranian flags. Many of them are forced to be there by the IRGC in Iran, but they are there nonetheless as really human shields, as if to say, you're going to have to blow up our women and children in order to get to our infrastructure, our power plants, and other things, that Iran holds dear. So it is a very, very difficult situation. The same thing was true in Gaza. In the conflict between Israel and Gaza. Israel would drop leaflets by the thousands before they would target a specific location, because they knew there were missile launchers, for instance, maybe next to a school. And Hamas in Gaza would intentionally place them there, knowing that Israel cares deeply about preserving human life, even the human life of their so-called enemies. They would drop leaflets to warn people to get out. So they would lose the advantage, the strategic advantage, Israel would, by notifying and letting civilians in Gaza know to get out before they hit a certain area. And again, as you mentioned, they're doing the same thing by alerting Iranians, don't get on the trains right now because they're going to be potentially targeted if there was no ceasefire.
Right. It's amazing to see that unfold. And I hope that people are paying attention to those details, because it says a lot about who we're dealing with here.
Yeah, it's the same thing in Lebanon. The former PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, under former Yasser Arafat, when they moved their headquarters to Beirut, Lebanon, they would put their offices in the center, in the middle sections of office towers in Beirut, knowing that Israel would have to hurt civilians in order to get to the terrorist leadership that's embedded there in these towers in Beirut. And they do the same thing now. They have facilities all over suburbs of Beirut. And the challenge for Lebanon is you have Hezbollah that really has become the strongest component really within the Lebanese country in terms of governance. They were very, very powerful. Now you have a Lebanese government that is saying we're in agreement with Israel. We want to see Hezbollah go, but they're weak. And just before we sat down here, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel said we're now going to officially sit down with the government of Lebanon to work out a deal to push Hezbollah out of Lebanon. So that could be very significant if the Lebanese government, who still is in a weak position, but works together with Israel to try to push Hezbollah out, an Iranian proxy that has been a thorn in Israel's side for decades, firing rockets all the time. We've been in those. We've been there in northern Israel when those sirens have gone off and those rockets have come in from Lebanon into northern Israel.
It's very, very surreal, and obviously we continue to pray as part of our ministry that we are praying for our staff and our friends that are there, because this is daily life for them. But obviously we're in a different set here, and we have a map sitting next to us. And with everything going on, it's very helpful to really begin to place these locations and understand the intricacies. The Strait of Hormuz, and I think you'll probably touch on that here in a moment, is how serious is this situation from a geographical standpoint, and what are we looking at? So.
Yeah, well, there's some critical choke points in the Middle East as it relates to trade, commerce, oil, and the Strait of Hormuz is probably one of the most significant ones of those choke points. Just to point out a couple of the others, you have the Suez Canal up here that runs through along the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. You also have down here in the south, you have the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is separating the Arabian Peninsula from Africa. A very narrow choke point entrance from the Indian Ocean into the Red Sea. And then, of course, as you mentioned, and what's in the news so prominently right now is the Strait of Hormuz. And it's a very narrow area, about 20, 22 miles wide, depending on where you're looking. And there's a series of small islands on the Iranian side as well, which gives them some strategic advantages. And tankers must go through here. So if you are bringing oil from Saudi Arabia or from Kuwait or from Qatar or UAE, you have to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And the actual area where tankers can travel is only about 2 miles wide.
Wow.
So it's a very narrow strait. Iran on this side is very mountainous. Actually, both sides are mountainous. On this side, you have what's called Musandam, which is in Oman, the country of Oman, right adjacent to the United Arab Emirates. I just happened to be there just about 6 months ago in Musandam, right at the Strait of Hormuz, and it is a very mountainous, beautiful area, very dry. But then, of course, you have the Persian Gulf that runs through these series of mountains in this area of Musandam on the other side, on the Omani side of the strait. But on the Iranian side, also very mountainous. So Iran has an advantage from the standpoint of trying to control the strait and to wreak havoc on tankers that are going to be bringing oil from all of these nations, including Iran itself. All these tankers that are coming through, they can really create a huge problem.
Looking at the map there, and if the details are accurate, it does appear that the high ground is on the Iranian side.
Yeah, it's mountainous on both sides, but Iran really has some huge advantages because they have a very broad, long coastline where they can, and they're fighting an asymmetric battle. I've scratched my head a few times thinking, why is it that when the United States has air superiority, why is it that we have so many military vessels in the area? Why is it that we can't control this Strait of Hormuz or keep Iran from creating problems for the tankers and the transit of ships going through? The reason is that Iran is fighting an asymmetric war. That means they can use very inexpensive things like drones that are coming from other areas, from in the mountainous regions, surface-to-air missile launchers that they can hide in caves and then bring out quickly, or along roadways. So they also have fleet of small ships that they can send out, swarms of ships that are small, almost like fishing vessels.
Right.
When I was there, again, a few months ago, there were fishing vessels all over this area, small little ones that are very unregulated, that can just go almost freely back and forth. I was told that when we were in Oman and Musandam that many days you have small fishing boats that just come across just by trade, for trading, coming across from Iran through the Strait of Hormuz. So they fight an asymmetrical war battle, and they also have mines. They have undersea mines where they can really create a sense of uncertainty for the ships coming through. So they don't even have to sink a ship. It's the threat of it, and also the insurance that drives costs so high for these tankers as they come through. So it's a huge problem. So the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian really control over it has really crippled the world. 20% of the world's oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And you talk, 20% is, that's a huge amount when you're talking about its impact on the world, and specifically Europe. The United States, we don't really get much of our oil from the Gulf. We have so much of our own, also now with Venezuela. But for Europe, a lot of their oil is coming through the Strait of Hormuz. So that is a major choke point. And to take it even further is that there have been alternatives that have been looked at.
Okay.
Through the years, there are many alternatives that have been explored. Unlike, and if we go back here just to take a look, unlike the Suez Canal, which was a channel that was dug man-made, it's soft, flat terrain, soft sand, flat terrain. This is completely different in this part of the world. This is an area that is very mountainous and very hard stone, so very difficult to dig channels. However, having said that, the United Arab Emirates has proposed a channel that would run right through from, it has coastlines on both the Persian Gulf, and there's this little outcropping of Oman at the tip, but UAE also controls area on this side that's adjacent to their land territory. So there's been a proposal for them to create a channel that would run through the United Arab Emirates from the Gulf of Oman, the Indian Ocean, into the Persian Gulf, almost like a Suez Canal type of a structure that would go through there, but at a huge cost with many locks because of the height issues, the mountain issues.
And it's not a quick remedy either.
It's not a quick remedy. It's not, we're gonna have this next month.
Right.
So it's been a proposal that's been on the table. There's been another one to go from UAE, from the area of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, to cut this way down through Oman into this area, which would completely circumvent and would bypass this whole Strait of Hormuz issue. That's another one that's been proposed as well. So those two things, those two areas, but this one is a proposed cost of in excess of $100 billion, and some say up to $200 billion. And you're talking about a 10 or 15 year project if you're talking about those lengths.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really not a workable solution, although they have been looked at in the past. And then, but what's really in the works right now, and where Saudi Arabia actually is working on this, and the United Arab Emirates is working on this, is a different route where ships can come from other parts of the world to an existing port that's right there on the Gulf of Oman, again through the Indian Ocean, in the United Arab Emirates, offload, and then by rail. Many people have heard of Etihad Airlines, a major airline in the United Arab Emirates. Well, they have Etihad Rail. And so the rail line would connect through UAE over into Saudi Arabia. And in this area of Saudi Arabia is where they have a lot of their oil refineries. So Saudi Arabia can jump on, connect their own rail through Riyadh, the capital, and over this way. Right now, they are coming over to the Red Sea. They have a port called Yanbij, which is on the Red Sea. So there is, not by rail, but by pipeline, Saudi Arabia has now created an alternative.
That pipeline you just referenced, that's existing, right?
It's an existing
and that's something
pipeline
that they're using. I think I even heard that in the news recently. Because of everything going on, they've put more emphasis to that pipeline to keep moving their oil.
Exactly. So they're not having to put it on ships and run it through the Strait of Hormuz. They're running it by pipeline over to this port that they have on the Red Sea, close to the city of Medina. You've heard of Mecca and Medina. This is close to Medina. And then from there, it will be put on ships and go up through the Red Sea and up to the Suez Canal into through the Mediterranean to Europe. So this is an alternative. This is what Saudi Arabia is doing right now. However, what's important to know, and we've talked about this in other episodes, is there is something that's been proposed called IMEC.
Mm-hmm.
And IMEC is the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. And I believe that this is one of the significant proposals globally that's on the table that the United States and President Trump is pushing. You don't hear a lot about it in the news, but as a backstory to so much of what is going on, I think that IMEC is very significant in terms of what it can do for the world, what it can do for the West, and how it can unify large segments of the Middle East, specifically the Arab nations. But it also is it is something that is stirring a lot of anger and animosity in other nations of the Middle East as well. So I'm going to take just a moment to kind of explain a little bit about IMEC and its proposal. It's designed to come from India, which would be a low-cost manufacturing hub.
Replacing China.
Replacing China in
Yep.
large measure, correct. And it would come through, again, the Strait of Hormuz. So that's part of the proposal. And to the area of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, where there are many ports along the United Arab Emirates. From there, it would go on train, again, through the capital of Riyadh. It would have connections to Saudi Arabia's oil. And by train, this proposal is to go up through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, to the area of Beit Shan. And Beit Shan is mentioned in the Bible, and it is in Israel, just on the western side of the Jordan River, just south of the Sea of Galilee. And from Beit Shan, it would cross into Israel at Beit Shan, go through the Jezreel Valley, and up to Israel's very large port of Haifa. And from there, it would be put on container ships and move off to Europe. So this is a major proposal, again, called IMEC. All of the nations that are in view here, that are along the route, all have normalized relations except for two. And those two nations are Saudi Arabia and Israel. So if you are not in favor of this pipeline, if you're one of the surrounding nations that are not along this route, of this trade route, of a pipeline, of the rail, connecting India to Europe, if you're not part of that, if you're on the outside looking in, you're not happy at all. So nations like Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey are not happy about the idea of being bypassed by this new route. China also is unhappy about it.
It's interesting because obviously you've talked about this before, and the events of October 23 in Israel taking place, where Hamas made their attack,
Their massacre against southern Israel.
And kind of to jump in, because as you mentioned, IMEC had just been announced a month earlier, and that destabilized the region enough for everybody to kind of pull back and say, well, what now?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, if we're going to take a look at that, and I think it's so valuable to do that, because if you're talking about right down here, Gaza, and you want to see what can we do, if you're these other nations, if you're Iran, what can we do to thwart this new trade route that is being pushed by the United States, embraced by Europe, embraced by India, and embraced by all of these other countries that would unite them in a way that they've never been united before? What can you do to throw something into the middle of that mix to keep it from happening? Well, the way to do that is to create animosity between the two nations that are on the cusp of signing an Abraham Accord. And that's what President Trump had been pushing. Israel and the United Arab Emirates had signed that. Bahrain, a small country here, also had signed the Abraham Accords, and some other nations as well. But the big prize in the signing of these Abraham Accords is if you could get Saudi Arabia to sign it with Israel. And why was President Trump, and is he pushing so much and so hard for them to normalize relations with each other? It's because of this route that runs through both of their nations.
That's so interesting. And now with the ongoing war and the way the tide has shifted and the way Iran has responded to not just Israel, not just the U.S., to attack these other countries who are all namely involved, how might that impact Saudi's decision to say, you know what? Yes, you did this before, but now this response that is impacting us, you're not our friendly neighbor by any means. There's more reason for them to move forward.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways thus far in this conflict is that Iran is not bashful about sending rockets into its Arab neighbors. I think from the West perspective, we say, that we kind of tend to lump them together and say, well, they're all Muslims, and so they're all united in their front against Israel, and therefore they're united with each other. But that's not true at all. As a matter of fact, you have Iran and portions of Iraq and portions of Lebanon and Syria that have a significant Shia Muslim population. So Iran has majority Shia. There's a good number of Shia Muslims in Iraq, in Syria, and then also in Lebanon, and then also down here in Yemen as well. They're a different version of Islam than what Saudi Arabia and the other Arab nations subscribe to. Now they have segments like in eastern Saudi Arabia, they have some Shia Islamists there. Bahrain has quite a number of Shia Islamists, but by and large, Sunni Muslims, which Saudi Arabia and the Arab world subscribes to primarily, they think that the version of Islam in Iran and Iraq is heretical. So they are at odds with each other. Saudi Arabia and the Arab world have been at odds with each other. And so what we're seeing is that Iran has not been bashful at all about sending in rockets into these Arab neighboring countries. And this is a concern that UAE and Qatar and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Oman, they've been worried about this for a long time, about the buildup of Iranian power and its projecting power outside of its borders through its proxies.
So this is where I think things really get interesting, because the geopolitics have major impacts globally. And there are a lot of people who get lost there. They just see the surface. And you ask the question, well, where does this have anything to do with biblical prophecy and history or anything like this? And it has so much to do with it. And it goes way back into the prophets.
Yeah, it really, it's true. And people are asking, how does this, what is Iran's place in the future? Does Iran have a place at the table? Will it be there? Will it be on the scene? What will it be doing as the world moves forward and as we get close to the last days? And I think we're getting very close to, some would say we're living in the last days right now. I think that the emergence of the Antichrist, as the Bible describes in great detail, and the return of Jesus Christ, I don't think they're that far off. I think that the emergence of the Antichrist could happen in short order, whether it's in 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know. I think that Jesus Christ could return in my lifetime, or certainly in the lifetime of my children or my grandchildren at some point. I think that we're not far off from the events of the last days, specifically in connection to the emergence of the Antichrist and the return of Jesus Christ. So people are saying, well, okay, is everything that we're seeing now, does it have prophetic implications? And I would say absolutely. It's like pieces on a chessboard that are being moved into position. And these are some big moves that we're seeing right here on that geopolitical and geoprophetic chessboard. We see up here, and people may be asking while they're looking at this, why do we have this place listed here? I've never heard of that. Or this place up here, I've never heard of that. Well, in the Bible, in specific passages, for instance, in Jeremiah chapter 49, or in Isaiah chapter 13, or in Ezekiel 38, these places are mentioned. This is a newer name. Iran is a more modern name since 1935, but its historic name was Persia. And if you want to go back even further, to about 650 BC, we had the Medes and the Persians recorded in the Bible, so Media, and that's in the area. They were mountainous people. They lived in the Zagros Mountains in what is today northern Iran, very close to the area of the capital city today of Iran, Tehran. About 2,000 years ago, we had the Elamites. They came, Elam was a grandson of Noah. And the Elamites, his people, his tribe, settled in this area, which is in the lowlands of what is today western Iran. And so you have the Elamites and the Medes. The Bible clearly talks about, in Jeremiah 49, it talks about these locations, these people groups. And there are prophecies also in Isaiah chapter 13, which I think is a very important chapter as it relates to the future of Elam and of the Medes. I think that it is clear that in those passages specifically Isaiah 13. Ezekiel 38 refers to Persia in the last days, and a group of nations that will descend upon Israel in the last days, I believe, under the leadership of the Antichrist. So all of these passages give us insight into the Elamites and the Medes, which are the ancient names for what is today we know as Iran. And so I do believe that Iran will be on the scene in the last days. God will use them for his purposes to attack other parts of the Middle East, and specifically Israel as well. So I think that it's clear biblically that we have the Iranians they're not going away. They are going to be here on the scene, and they're going to be significant in the last days. I think that they have been severely pushed back in their capabilities? Absolutely. Do I think that what the U.S. has done in terms of trying to curtail their nuclear ambitions is critically important? Absolutely. But I think biblically, Iran will still be on the scene as we get closer to the end.
That brings up another interesting point, and I think we won't go too deep into this, but this region and the fall of Iran, if you will, opens the door for some other things to happen. And you mentioned Ezekiel 38, and that brings up immediately Gog and Magog. And what are the elements there that we're looking at that make up what we understand to be Magog? Because some people used to say, oh, is it Russia? But we know it's not. So,
yeah, again, I'll use the map to try to explain a little bit about that. I would suggest that when the Bible in Ezekiel 38 is speaking of Meshach and Tubal and Togarmah in context, those are tribal names, and they're connected to Noah's ancestor, Noah's descendants. And they landed, when Noah landed, he landed in what is today the mountainous areas of eastern Turkey, what we call Turkey today, close to the former borders with Russia and Armenia, that whole area up there. But his descendants occupied the area of Turkey. They moved into the area of Mesopotamia. The Elamites moved down here. But many of those tribal names that are mentioned, Tubal, Togarmah, those are in the area, I believe, of what is today Turkey. So what is fascinating and sobering, I think, is that in Ezekiel chapter 38, we read of an invasion of nations from the north. And we're told specifically that with them, and I would say with the Turks, are the Persians. It lists them in Ezekiel chapter 38, and the Ethiopians down south, and probably the Libyans as well. So there's a coalition of nations that are going to be coming up against Israel in the last days. And what I think is interesting, and I go back to, and I will not be dogmatic on this, but I want to share it because I think it's important for God's people to understand that what is happening geopolitically right now may have major implications for the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, again, as we move further into the future. So I would suggest, and once again, if you have, and that's an if you have the development of an IMEC, and you have this route that moves through here economically, incidentally, right through the Jezreel Valley and the future site of Armageddon, up to the port of Haifa and then onto Europe, you have another competing route. And that competing route is coming right through here, through Iraq, through a huge new port that was just created. And this is a trade route that is supported by Iraq, by Syria, and by Turkey. And it is a competing route. So I would suggest that if that route does not develop to the level or to the degree that the Turks, the Syrians, the Iraqis, and the Iranians want to see, if it doesn't develop to that level, but IMEC becomes the primary route to move goods, to move oil, to move low-cost products from India to Europe, and that becomes the major route, and it unifies the Arab world with Israel, that potentially could be the impetus for a northern coalition of nations, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and some of the Turkic republics to the north, to form a coalition that says, we are not happy being left out of this economic windfall that has taken place with this lower trade route, and therefore we have justification in their own minds to come down, as Ezekiel says, to what? Take a spoil and to take a prey. and to carry away cattle and goods. So I won't be dogmatic, but it is important that we're aware of some of the proposals and some of these geopolitical developments that are happening right now under our nose, right in front of us. And specifically, the Strait of Hormuz right now being blocked by Iran may have major prophetic implications.
Right. I think that is also helpful for so many that don't have the steady of Scripture. Maybe they just have touched the surface and they're really trying to figure out what is happening here. How does this impact me? How does this impact the future? And you begin to understand how all of this connects. It really does begin to paint the picture. You see the mosaic coming together of the timeline, of God's timeline. And as again, you said, we're not being dogmatic, but absolutely you can begin to understand how these relationships work between these countries and why it matters and why we should be paying attention. We should be diligent to be in the Word. We should be diligent to be praying because these things are happening before our eyes.
Yeah.
Go for it. I see you reaching for that magazine there.
Yeah, and I would suggest that if you want to know more about this, you can read. I have a recent Flashpoint Geoprophecy report in our current issue of the magazine. It's called "The Oracles of Elam." So our folks learned about Elam today. Oracles are declarations or prophecies that were given, divine statements given by the prophets in the Old Testament about certain things. And the Oracles of Elam is connected to what we've been talking about. And then also we can give a deeper teaching. Yeah,
you have a deeper teaching that we did with our Open Bible Studio electives. That can be found on YouTube. It can be found on our app. It can be found on our website. So I encourage you, if you have not, download the Zion's Hope app. You can find all things Zion's Hope there. You can just certainly sign up for a subscription of Zion's Fire. That is an amazing piece that comes out several times a year. And if you haven't received it yet, go to our website, visit our store, the Silver Shekel, and use the code FIRESTARTER. That'll get you a 1-year free subscription to Zion's Fire. And stay connected with us on social media. There's always things that we're sharing, and there's always things to learn and to watch for. So steady with us, stay alert, stay in the Word, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Zion's Wire, a podcast fueled by a passion for God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. If you were encouraged by today's episode, share it with a friend and subscribe. Or follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Help us reach more people with the message of hope by leaving a 5-star review and download the Zion's Hope app for additional teachings and content. Keep the conversation going with questions or comments. Until next time, keep watching, keep praying, and keep your heart fixed on God's Word.